All right, so good evening to everybody, and welcome to this India Facts webinar on the subject of government control of Hindu temples. My name is Sandeep Balakrishna, and I'll be the host for this webinar. Today's speaker, uh, Mr. T.R. Ramesh, was scheduled to speak today, but unfortunately, he had to travel out of town on an emergency. So, Mr. Nagarajan, who works closely with him and equally knowledgeable about this issue, will address us this evening. So, to give a brief introduction, a brief profile of Mr. Nagarajan. Mr. Nagarajan has been a sales management professional with over 33 years of experience. Yes, that's right. It's 33 years of experience. And he's worked both in India and in the US. He's currently running a professional services firm which helps customers with sales management strategies and processes. Mr. Nagarajan holds a deep and abiding belief and faith in our ancient smritis and books of wisdom and philosophy. Together with Mr. T.R. Ramesh, he is deeply involved in retrieving Hindu temples from government control. So it is our honor and pleasure to have Mr. Nagarajan on this forum, and he will address this webinar from now on. He will speak. The format is something like this. Mr. Nagarajan will briefly speak for about 20 minutes to 30 minutes. And after that, there will be a question and answer session. You can direct all your questions to him. Mr. Nagarajan, it is over to you now.
Thank you, Sandeep. A quick prayer. Bhadram Pashyemakshabhirijatraha Sthirairangaihi Tushtuvaahum Sastunuvihi Yashema Deva Hitam Yadayuhu Sastina Indro Vruddhashrabaha Sastina Pusha Vishvavedaha Sastina Staksharyo Arishtanevihi Swastino Brahaspatir Dadatu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, it's a great opportunity, Sandeep, and thank you for having us this evening. And I really appreciate all the others who have joined in this webinar. Where do I begin? I think let me recount my experience recently in Bangalore. I'm not sure how many of you who are listening to this were in a recent seminar in Bangalore. While we're preparing for a similar theme on government control of Hindu temples, the thought that struck us was, you look at all the temples in South India specifically, it was the Vijayanagar kingdom that contributed the most. There's hardly any temple which does not mark the kind of work that Vijayanagar kingdom has done for them. Yet, unfortunately, most of us do not really know about the Vijayanagar kingdom. All of us are extremely familiar. If you ask any of you who was the founder of Mughal dynasty, you would say Babur. If you ask you who followed Babur, you would immediately say Humayun, and then Akbar, and then Jahangir, Shah. Everybody knows this. But if I were to ask you who founded the Vijayanagar kingdom, and by the way, Vijayanagar kingdom existed between 1335 and 1660, 1670, while the Mughal kingdom existed between 1435 and 1770. Roughly 300 years. Both of them ruled a large part of a country for 30 years each, 300 years each. Yet, our education system, thanks to Mr. Macaulay, has left us in a state where we remember the Mughal dynasty throughout our school, drummed into us, and very few of us knows about the Vijayanagar dynasty. I've asked this question, ask yourself, who was a founder? Who are the great kings? We don't know. And yet, it was Vijayanagar dynasty which left us all these temples and wealth of knowledge and ancient wisdom. And what has Mughal dynasty left us? Couple of 3 or 4 Muslims of as a tribute to dead kings and princesses. So it's very important we understand. So let me start with what is the need to retrieve temples? I think that's where I want to start off. And I want to talk about six ways in which we have been slighted or we have been impacted by the government. First of all, the Constitution, very few of us are aware, the Constitution provides us with the right to profess, practice, and propagate our religion. Now, Hinduism is not strictly religion, it's a wealth of knowledge and wisdom. How are we able to propagate it? We are not able to propagate it because the entire temple wealth that we are supposed to have inherited is completely lost. For example, let's take one example alone in one state, and I'm sure this applies to almost all the states. In Tamil Nadu alone, 38,000 temples own almost about 5 lakh acres of land. They have 22,600 buildings and more than 3 crore square yards of housing sites. 3 crore square yards.
Wow.
And the government is supposed to collect rent from these temples, from these properties for the maintenance and activities of the temples. I'll come to what activities they are in a moment from now. If you take any thumb rule, the reasonable market rent, or forget market rent, less than market rent, the temples should receive 6,000 crores per year. And in reality, what the temples get, what the government collects on behalf of temples, hold your breath, is 58 crores.
Wow.
In effect, Tamil Nadu temple alone are losing 5,940 crores per year. And you can apply this equally to Karnataka, to Andhra Pradesh, to Orissa, Maharashtra, take any state. That's how munificent our ancient rulers were. And we just lost it all. I mean, I can go into many such cases. I will not do it. One of the research studies we did was, we took the case of a Maila and donations. Another example of the planning to which, the depth of planning in Tanjavur temple specifically, and it applies to almost every other temple, was the king said, we must light lamps in the temple.
Sorry, am I audible now? I'm just testing something.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thanks. Please continue. Sorry.
Okay, so the kings decided that the temple should have lamps, and these lamps should be lighted every day. In ancient time, the lamps were lighted from the ghee made of goat milk. And they calculated precisely how many goats needed to be sustained and how much ghee should be produced to light 1,000 lamps. It's all that inscriptions.
Wow.
The detailed calculations. And then the king said, to do this, I need to make an endowment. And he called some 10 or 15 citizens and gave them each gold. And said, in today's gold price is X, 12%, this is the exact amount that's inscribed there. It's 12% interest you will pay to the temple. And he appointed some hundreds of people who rear the goats and offer the ghee to the temple. I mean, of course, all the gold is lost, the ornaments are lost, all we are left with are the inscriptions and the land. And even that is in the danger of being usurped by unscrupulous people. Now, let me come to most important, the fifth impact: knowledge, art, and culture. Every form of knowledge, art, and culture has been sustained by temples. The temples were the Garbhagriha of our wisdom. They were the font around which the entire community was built. Think about this for a second. All of us, say that university system came into being somewhere in early 1900s, late 1800s. What was the system of education that existed before that? Before this guy Macaulay screwed up everything, the entire education system existed before that was sustained by the temples. And by the way, the temples did not just teach the Vedas or temple rituals. There are records, and we chanced upon a record specifically from Madras Presidency, Collector's Report of 1822 to 25. He has given a report of details of schools and colleges between 1922 and 25, just before Macaulay. I'm sure all of you understand the impact of Macaulay on our education system. This report says that there were 1,53,182 male students in the schools and colleges in Madras Presidency. Okay? And what were they taught? They were taught using Sanskrit books to teach grammar, lexicology, mathematics, medical science, logic, law. I mean, this is amazing. I mean, this is what our temples sustain. And look at the state we are in today. Like I mentioned earlier on, one single temple can sustain some thousands of students, and that can contribute to community development. Now, lastly, temples have been converted to government departments. We have n number of IAS officers. I spoke about Tamil Nadu alone. In Andhra Pradesh, okay, the temples, so is the case in Tamil Nadu and in most other states. The government charges administrative fees to manage the temple properties. And we saw how they collect 58 crores when they should even nominally collect something like 6,000 crores. Now, to collect 58 crores, the government actually charges the temple 90 crores as administrative fee. It's outsourcing, guys. They outsourced the management of temple property to government, and to manage that, the temple pays 98 crores, and the government gives the temples 58 crores in return. And all the 98 crores that the government charges, they spend less than 40 crores in paying their salaries and administrative expenses. I mean, I can go on. Now, here is the crux. Let me jump to the second part of the presentation. I mean, I don't think there should be any doubt whatsoever on the urgent need to retrieve our temples. I mean, like Pujya Swamiji, Dayanand Saraswati, who's our inspiration and leader, who's driving the retrieval of temples, he says, retrieving temples is Rishi Rinam. It's a debt to our rishis who have bequeathed huge amount of knowledge to us. You must have heard other speakers talk of Hindu wisdom and knowledge. It's a Rishi Rinam to bring back the temples and bring it back to the community and not let it go away. Now, how do we retrieve it? That's the biggest challenge, and we're all working on it, and we had some successes. Let me talk about it for a couple of seconds. The biggest challenge we have is awareness. We are not aware that we have fundamental rights to not just profess and practice, but propagate our religions and take charge of our temples. The whole business of government control started way back in 1810, 1815, during the time of the East India Company. At that time, they started off, what we had in terms of governance was what is called Board of Revenue. So Board of Revenue took over, Board of Revenue took over the collection of land revenue on behalf of the kings who ceded the control to them. And while doing that, they also said we'll collect the rents for temple lands also. And that's how Regulation 19 of Bengal 1810 and Regulation 7 of Madras 1817 came into being. For the appropriation of rents and produce of lands granted for the support of mosques, Hindu temples, colleges, and other purposes. For building and repair of bridges, sarais, katras, other public buildings. These are the activities the temple supported. The government took over. Now, interestingly, in less than 50 years, the government said it is not, once the East India Company became more and more entrenched and started actually getting to governing the country, they said managing temples is not something we need to do. And they gave the temples back in 1863. Now, unfortunately for us, over the period of time, somehow we seem to have allowed the courts and the government to determine what is the rights and religious practices that we as a community must practice and what we must do in temples. The result was what was handed back to the people was taken over by the government in 1925, where they said we'll take over the temples. And the Madras Act 1927, actually, Act 2 of 1927, was given further shape in 1951, and that is the font of all evils of temples. And again, the Supreme Court has struck down government's right to manage or appoint executive officers for temples. And we don't seem to be aware of that. The most telling case was recent times is this Chidambaram Natarajar case. The Supreme Court has unambiguously said temples can be taken over only to cure evil. They use the word evil. Legislature did not intend and cannot replace government as a statutory authority to manage temples. And Supreme Court said takeover of temples can only be for a limited period, and it must be handed back to the community or the trustees. And this is something none of us are aware. Now, what are we as Temples Worshippers Society doing? The three things we believe that we must focus on in order for us to be able to manage or retrieve, restore, and bequeath the temples to our future generations as they come to us. To retrieve the temples, we are taking three major actions or strategies, if we call it. Awareness, education, and legal action. Awareness, we need to create the groundswell that this is our right and this is what we are losing. The second one is agitation, by and protesting against illegal, unethical practices by government. The third is legal action. For example, Vellore, the temple took over a government managed by private parties for the last 30 years. We helped them file a case. We helped them fight in Supreme Court. Chidambaram case. We have been helping the Dikshitars for the last years in terms of providing them legal acumen, understanding. And by the way, because the temples are relegated, it's nobody's business, there's not enough legal knowledge available in the country. There are very few people who really understand the temple legislatures. I'll give an example to you. 1951, Tamil Nadu Madras government passed a law taking over temples. And there were several clauses. The whole thing went to Supreme Court in a very landmark case called LT Swamiyar case, otherwise called as the Udupi case also. The Devasthanams, Udupi Sri Krishna Devasthanam, LT Swamiyar specifically, and a couple of other temples challenged the 1951 Act. Supreme Court in 1957-58 struck down several provisions of the Madras Act as being unconstitutional. The specific provisions we can talk about, I have the details. Within 2 years of those sections being struck down, in 1959, the Madras government re-enacted a law introducing exact same wordings, the same sections that are struck down by Supreme Court. Now, how do you explain a situation where Supreme Court says that these sections are ultra vires the Constitution and the state legislature does not have the competence to enact such laws? 2 years later, the state legislature just brings them back verbatim into another act. So there's huge amount of lack of legal understanding and legal knowledge. So we at Temple Worshipper Society see ourselves as a kind of catalyst, as a resource pool for people who want to fight specific temple-related issues. And we are very successful in Chidambaram case, and at present there are 5 court cases which we are pursuing. The foremost among them, for which we seek all your support, is filed by Swami Dhyanand Saraswati on behalf of Hindu Dharma Acharya Sabha, with a prayer to declare the acts in Tamil Nadu, Pondicherry, and Andhra Pradesh ultra vires constitution, several provisions of those acts. That is in Supreme Court. Parallelly, we have filed two other cases in Tamil Nadu also. Then there are specific temple-related cases we are fighting. There was a recent case where a Pillayar temple was taken over by government in Besant Nagar, in heart of residential Chennai. So we have filed a case and helping them fight it. Recently, there was attempt by government to appoint executive officer for Vaidiswaran Kovil. We are helping that. There are a couple of cases in Karnataka where we are helping the local communities fight the government takeover. Here is the last, I would not say last, here is a takeaway I want all of you to remember. Supreme Court has held in unambiguous terms that government cannot appoint executive officers to manage temples. Such appointment is illegal. If at all government wants to take over temples, it can take over for righting specific evils only, the term used by. So government has established that there is mismanagement or there are things which are not going right. In fact, actually speaking, wherever EOs are there have been several evils which have been perpetuated. Forget them rectifying it. So if you come across any of these mismanagement or usurpation of rights, that single judgment can overturn the government's interference. Second, using the Right to Information Act, you can focus on specific temples and ask for three things. A, what is the government order by which the temple was taken over? B, copies of audit reports that are conducted by government year after year. In fact, there are several years and arrears. And specifically, at the time of takeover, there is a document which goes by the section number of the act of the state it pertains to. This document is supposed to be prepared by the government at the time of takeover. You can ask for a copy of this document. Using these three, we can file a petition in the High Court under which which has jurisdiction of the temple to throw the government out of the temple. And who will take over? The community should take over. Every temple is a denominational temple. There's a specific communities that have been managing the temples for generations. We need to do some research to find out those communities or castes that were managing the temples, bring them back into the fold, and allow them the privilege and the right of managing the temples the way it should be. And lastly, there are 6 major functions a temple should carry on. And we need to put this into practice. A, rituals. B, livelihood for the temple priests. Famous temple in Tirunelveli. At the time of independence, 1947, there were 48 priests because there are so many sub-shrines for which you need to conduct rituals and pujas, etc. Today, there are 4 priests. And each of those 4 priests are paid something between 48 to 54 rupees per month. We must first retrieve the temples and ensure that the pujas and the other rituals are conducted properly. Second, there must be an equitable way in which the priests are compensated, so that they can lead a respectable livelihood. Third, the Veda Patashalas, Agama Patashalas, the traditional arts and temple-related sciences, those must be restored. There are specific endowments for them. Third, there must be chatrams the dharamshalas are worshippers and pilgrims, goshalas, and there must be periodic satsangs and pravachanams to enlighten Hindus on their traditions and culture. And lastly, there must be annadanams, true annadanams at every temple, almost similar to what we see in Gurudwaras. So this is what we are trying to get towards. And I thought that's about what I thought I will share with you this evening. I think I've exceeded the time, almost 30 minutes. Sorry about it, Sandeep.
Oh, no. This was very enlightening. And on behalf of all of you, as well as on behalf of India Facts, this was really enlightening. And I mean, some of the facts that Mr. Nagarajan has brought to light is pretty stunning and startling. And so now I'll throw the floor open for questions. For those who don't have video access, just put a message in the chat. I'll ask on your behalf. For those who have video access, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you guys, or you can unmute yourself. Who wants to go first? Yes, please. Unmute yourself. Okay. Okay, ask now. Hello? Chanakya 74, you're not audible.
Can't hear you.
You're not audible. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Namaste.
Just wanted to know if now that the BJP government has come to the power, can't temples be handed over back to all across India?
Hey, good question, Chanakya. Couple of answers. Number one, we still have a major challenge in terms of who should the temples be handed over to. And remember, the courts are not courts will not just say, government, go away and leave it back home. They will want to know what's the alternative structure. And the second problem we have is the temple laws, since they've already been enacted, they are state subjects. So the center cannot enact a law which affects what is the concurrent list which has already been enacted by the state. So therefore, the center, we are definitely working with the center on giving specific guidelines which can help us. But it is a local action on specific temples which can gather the momentum. There cannot be a blanket, in our understanding and in our belief. There cannot be a blanket saying that, look, all temples are to be handed over back to people. That cannot happen.
Yeah, but just to play a devil's advocate, but that would still be better than what the government is doing now, I suppose.
Absolutely right. I think you're bang on. But unfortunately, see, we have allowed the government, especially we Hindus, we allowed the government and the courts to decide, I said this earlier on, to decide what is right and what is wrong for us. Now, and this state has continued. This is not just after independence. It started in 1925, 27. And it has gone on for 90 years. And remember, there are court rulings on this since 1930s. The Nataraja temple case originated in 1918 something.
All right, thanks so much for that. Now, I get a question from Mr. Sangat Chadvam. His question is there any specific information for Central India and North Indian temples? And he also has an addition to what Mr. Nagarajan just said. He says there are some instances where central government is involved for temple takeover like Kashi Vishwanath. And what about those newer temples which don't conform to the Agama Vidhis in the construction? What should be done about them?
Great. First of all, I think when you say North India and the central provinces, etc., I think we have fairly good understanding of all the way into Maharashtra. And we have a reasonable understanding of what's happening in Himachal Pradesh, Orissa, Uttar Pradesh to a very small extent. The entire pocket of Uttar Pradesh, specifically large parts of Gujarat, Rajasthan, our temple heritage has been destroyed beyond retrieval. And Kashi Vishwanath temple is one such example. Right after independence, we reconstructed Somnath. Kashi Vishwanath is not being retrieved by central government. No. It is a fond wish of many people who are currently in the central government that we must retrieve Kashi Vishwanath and Mathura. But that is not an initiative that central government has right now undertaken, and it cannot. And to your point about Agama Vidhis and how temple architecture and new temples coming up, again, awareness. There are many communities, many denominations, the Satyanarayana, the movement, they have their own way of constructing temples, and they have every right to do so. What we specifically talk about are the heritage. What has been bequeathed to us? Can we preserve it?
All right. Who wants to go next?
I have a question on the funding of Veda Padashalas. Do we have any parallel system like madrasas where the government actually gives scholarship to people who wants to study Veda Padashalas? Is there any also systematic mechanism inside the temple structure across?
Over the last, no, there is no such process structure in place. The government, I think, except probably in stray cases, very, very minimal in Himachal Pradesh, in South, all the 4 states, no government support Veda Padashalas. Number of Veda Padashalas sustained by temples through specific endowments have come down to the extent that every temple was supporting through specific donation of land and revenue. Almost it has been decimated. None exists, so to speak. I mean, almost. The very few. We have got some 10 to 15 RTA responses. Everybody has said that we have. In fact, since government takeover, we asked the government, did you establish or fund any new Veda, Agama, temple-related sciences? The answer was unequivocal no.
Because as you mentioned in the beginning, that is a great source of employment for a lot of people. And if you look at one of the problems, most of the priests are running around money and then diluting the quality of the Hinduism as such. And the intellectual class is actually being destroyed of its primal quality not to pursue money.
That's correct. One of the things that's been destroyed completely by the government takeover is the sustenance of Veda, Agama, Patashalas. Veda, Agama and Shastra Patashalas, including architecture, logic, astronomy, other sciences. The college existed for all of this.
All right. Anybody else?
I'll give an example to you. I'm sorry. Let me continue for a second.
Okay.
If we retrieve one temple, and by the way, Chidambaram temple has his own Veda Padashalas also. And we're slowly trying to bring back the others. If we retrieve one temple and ensure that the revenue due to the temple is deployed for the purpose, we can have a reasonably, I mean, any town in South has a large temple with properties. We can have each temple sustaining anywhere between 200 to 500 students on a regular basis.
Okay. Anybody else wants to go next?
Yeah, this is Jayendra. I have a question. So is there any initiative to involve the local people surrounding the temples in temple sustenance? And second part of my question is, I heard a good part of the money, or rather entire money that's put into the hundis goes to the government. And I've heard stories about how it funds Hajj Yatra and other things. So is it a possibility to put a note or at least a small notice on every hundi that the money you're putting in this box is not fully going to the temple, or this percentage of goes is taken by the government. So that people would blindly dump it, and at least instead of putting 100, maybe put 5, and maybe think of putting the other 95 somewhere else for good constructive purpose. So the connection with the earlier question, first question is, if there are local committees which sustain the temples, people can consider donating to that committee, which will effectively take the control, the money flow out of the hands of the government.
See, I think great point. I think this has been something that we have been working on for the last almost a year now. We are focusing on a handful of temples, some 15, 16 temples. And for each of these 15, 16 temples, we are trying to create a local community that can passionately get involved in the management of the temple. And the youngsters in all these areas, Sugavaneshwar Temple in Salem, for example. So is the case in Triplicate and Kapaleshwar, many temples, a couple of temples in Karnataka as well. And the local groups. Placard in front of the hundi saying that 15% of what you contribute goes to government, and actually goes to government to buy a Innova fully loaded car which the wife or joint commissioner uses for purchasing saris. I can't put a placard like that. So the people standing outside temples of these temples with a small little, the small pamphlets which list out 5 or 6 points, including in very large case letters, that 15% of what you put in the hundis goes to government. We're doing that. And this has to be done temple-wise. And that is the point about awareness, which are trying to create.
All right. So I have a question from Mr. K. Nagarajan.
That's me.
Oh, that's you. Sorry. You say many temple properties are on rent with the same set of people for a very long time. Maybe you can expand on that.
Oh, absolutely. See, on paper, the temple property appears to be on rent with the same person. But in reality, what has happened is there are people who have sublet this, and there are other tenants.
Wow.
Prime Chennai, we have got full data. Annamalai, the temple, it has got a huge amount of land in Adyar. And believe it or not, 8,400 square feet of land in prime residential area is rented out for less than 500 rupees a month by the temple. Now, there is the act specifically says the commissioner cannot sell these properties and has to give, if he has given lease, the lease must be for a limited period of 3 years or less. And yet this is consistently flouted. How is it done? Very simple. It goes all the way to the top, total corruption. If I want to buy a prime property in Adyar and it belongs to temple, somebody would come and say that you please, the going rate is 8 crores. We'll sell this to you for maybe 5 crores. But all you got to do is pay 500 rupees per month to the temple. And who bothers about 500 rupees to HR and CE? And I take over the property. And I build, nobody questions me. I build my own house. And the property is name of somebody. The guy must have dead and gone. There are no records existing. And by the way, even this 500 rupees are in arrears for 5 years. And we came across a case of a Gangadhishwara temple in heart of Chennai, in Purasavakkam, which has leased out a land to Salvation Army. And I'm sure all of you guys know who Salvation Army is. It's a Christian outfit. And the Christian outfit has not paid rent for several years at cheap rates. And the total arrears is 5.9 lakhs. And there are specific provisions in the HRNC Act which says that defaulters cannot be treated like normal rent control act, with lot of litigation. specifically temple land, if is default, the person can be thrown out. The commissioner has the judicial powers to do so. Why would he do it? Because he is a secular. That's why.
All right. So now I have a question from Aparna. Will freeing Hindu temples also make entries to the temple free? Also, how can
Absolutely.
rampant commercialization of faith in holy Hindu temples be curbed? For example, like special queues for those who pay more, etc.
I think this is the biggest transgression on rights of devotees that government has instituted these different queue systems and seva systems of different levels of people. Temple doesn't recognize it. Here is something that we found out. Thiruvallur Temple, North Chennai, has an inscription that says Rajendra Chola, who contributed to the temple, stood as an ordinary devotee on the street waiting for the devotee to 1,000 years ago and prayed like an ordinary devotee. If government control goes, there will be no discrimination on who will visit the temple. Everybody is equal. You stand your turn, go do your darshan and come out. And that's one of the reasons we want to retrieve the temples, because they have been turned into commercial machinery, and they have been turned into commercial machinery for meeting not just the greed of politicians, but also for fulfilling the political agenda of the politicians. We have a sorry state that temples are used for annadanams on some party leader's death anniversary, which we call as Shradham. And we have governments, secular governments, conducting Shradhams in government temples by doing annadanam on the death anniversaries. I mean, what can we say?
All right. Any other questions?
By the way, one more point to the last question. Okay. There are two litigations which has been filed stopping the government from charging devotees for darshan and entry into temples.
Wow. Okay, next question. Yes, Mr. Admin has a question.
There's somebody called Kiran to all. I want to ask.
Sure. Yes, sir, sure.
Yeah, Mr. Nagan, that was an excellent overview on the situation. I just want to understand a little bit of background about your organization and what kind of infrastructure you've built in terms of your source of funding, and what are your plans, how you're fighting.
Hey, thank you. See, we are a very small group. We are just 6 of us in Temple Worshipper Society. And we get, we solicit funds from people who know us, believe in us. We contributed ourselves. We are in the process of, this is a constant process. We have a 3-year plan and we have a long-term plan. Our 3-year plan is to win a few major relief for the temples and temple devotees. And we are in the process already. And this 3-year plan calls for mobilization of roughly about 3 crores of rupees. In the last 3 years, we have spent close to 35-40 lakhs in terms of travel, lawyer fees, and RT applications. And all other work is voluntary. We are, one of the things that we are able to do and we are focusing on right now is to mobilize the funds. because each High Court litigation costs around 1 lakh of rupees. Supreme Court litigation can cost you almost 30 to 40 lakhs. Fortunately for us, Hindu Dharma, Sri Pujya Swamiji, Dhyanand Saraswati Swamiji has come forward to take up some of the expenses. But we are in the process of soliciting more funds.
That's very commendable, sir. And I have one question from Mr. Ramaswamy. If temples are out of government control, will it be in the hands of some kind of a trustee board? What is the procedure of choosing these trustees? And considering the level of morality vis-a-vis, today, considering the level of morality today vis-a-vis a century back, there should be a transparent procedure. Your thoughts? And what's your response?
Great question. This is one of the major issues on which you're working. What is the alternative structure? Justice Rama Joyce in Bangalore has been working on alternative structure for the past 4 years. And he originally started work on it on the request of Andhra Pradesh government. But subsequently, some of those provisions have been included in the Karnataka Act, which was passed, I think, in 2009, and which is still under dispute. It's not been fully been enacted and not been enforced yet. There are several inscriptions which tell us what should be the qualities of the trustees. And in current context, the broad thinking is there are 2 classes of trustees. One class of trustees will purely focus on the commercial aspects, that is, the funding and the resources. The other class of trustees will look after all religious affairs. They will be independent. The religious trustees will only look after the making sure that the temple functions are carried out properly, and they will work under supervision of a Dharma Acharya Sabha or the Matha or the denomination under which the temple comes. The commercial trustees who look after the resources and temple funds, they will obviously be subject to independent, good chartered accountants. This is this is work in progress, and we welcome anybody who wants to help contribute to this.
Excellent. Anybody else wants to ask Mr. Nagarajan questions?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What is the learning we can do from Hindu temples in countries like Indonesia? Can we learn at all?
Good question. But the only thing we can learn from them is, especially, I'm not sure about Indonesia, but in countries like Kampuchea, Angkor Wat and other areas, and more specifically from Bali, the kind of temple practices that they have preserved over centuries. Those are some things we can incorporate into our own temple practices, because we seem to have lost a lot of them.
Which is pretty sad, considering the country of origin of these practices.
Yeah, that is what 90 years of government control and complete erosion of our own wisdom can do to us.
Absolutely. Anybody else wants to ask him a question? Go on, don't feel shy.
Okay, one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a need to make going to temple cool for our youngsters?
See, for example, we have been thinking about it, but the last seminar in Bangalore, Jigyasa,
right?
We had so many youngsters. I think this is very heartening that the preservation of a culture is definitely has a very bright future, because youngsters are very passionately involved. And even if you look at the crowd that is assembling in temples even today, there's a large proportion of youngsters. And that's heartening. We can definitely reinforce these fundamental beliefs if they can turn the temples into what they originally were, not just a place of devotion and prayers, but also as a community center for wisdom and knowledge.
Yes, yes.
I would just like to add to what you just said, right?
Sure.
In today's generation, for example, the urban population, I mean, what do we do for recreation, right? We go to the mall. For example, from a city like Bombay, where I spend a lot of my years, there are no places outside that you can go and spend time with your friends. You'd more often than not go to a mall, watch a movie, do some shopping, and eat some food, right?
Mm-hmm.
But temples are, as you said, right? So a place where communities can come together. So it should not be just about wisdom and learning. It should be about coming together, having fun. There should be music, there should be theater, there should be art, right? There should be food. So we should try to see what is the present generation, what do they want, and how we could incorporate that in the amazing environment that could be created in our temples. So we should incorporate every aspect of our lives and not just learning and wisdom.
See, you're absolutely right. And if you go by your own Bombay experience, the community fervor that marked Ganpati is an excellent example of how communities come together and have fun. In about a month from now,
can somebody mute their mic here? I'm listening to a lot of background noise.
And as we speak, friends in Bengal are coming together for letting their hairs down and having a whole lot of fun and dances and music and eats and stuff in all over Bengal. Every temple has an annual festival when the community had fun. They even still do. That is obviously I can't replace a mall, but that is ingrained practice in every temple. But the core activities of temple continue to be devotion, praying to the deity, the sustenance of a knowledge and wisdom. Yes, we can let our hairs down. For that also there are provisions like the annual festivals where you can still see the fervor. Govindas, the Ganpatis, the Durga Pujas, the Dasharas. I mean, we have created all these things. A few of these practices are still there. Every temple, every year, you'll hear about it. Whether it's Pushkar or it is, the 5-year, 10-year Sangam. It's all there.
So, Mr. Hari Thirumalai has a question for you. What is the suggested alternative to Muzrai department?
Muzrai department has to go. There's no alternative. They just have to leave things and walk out. They have no role.
Mm-hmm.
Enough legislative and judicial recourse available to right any wrongs.
Mm-hmm.
Muzrai has no, as much as the HRNC in Tamil Nadu and the similar departments have no role in other states, Muzrai has no role.
Right. So this is from RK. Is there an example of a temple today that can serve as a role model for the kind of new structure we want? Not in government control, but well managed, which is Center for Knowledge, Culture, etc. And these are excluding temples run by mutts. Second, and related to temples, dances, is there a plan to support Devadasis and giving them the right to perform in temple rituals?
First is, I'm not sure if Devadasis exist today. There are very, very few pockets they do. Coming back to your first question, is there an example of a temple today that can serve as a role model?
Right.
There are few temples, but all of them serve as role models for different aspects. some of them in quasi-government control, some of them are not in government control. If you take Chidambaram, for example, that's a fantastic example of how to preserve the ancient practices, rites, rituals, and the temple jewels and properties. The Dikshitas as a community have been doing it, have been preserving their own culture, and it is not in government control, fortunately. Similarly, there are several temples in Kerala, even though they may be in government control, and like one of the participants asked, Kerala temples don't charge you for any kind of darshan. Yes, we can't go away entirely. There are very stray cases of somebody jumping the queue, but as a rule, there is no special fee by which you can jump the queue. And similarly, in no Kerala temple can you offer archana whenever you please. The temple priests perform the pujas, and there are, like I said, these are all scattered. We need to bring them all together into one temple.
All right. Any other questions? So we have one more from Mr. Ramaswamy. Apart from Annadanam, etc., can't temples use their funds for running educational institutions? I remember an article in Tughlaq where the author was proud of his generation being given immense values by the college run by the Palani Murugan temple.
Even today, the Palani Murugan temple exists, and fortunately, it has come into being because of some trustees at some point of time deciding to deploy the funds in that area. Mm-hmm. There are few temples like that. Tirupati temple is a good example. They have Venkateswara University. The other stray examples. But like I said, once we move the government out, we can actually bring back all these 6 elements back.
Okay, so from Manjunathan's iPad, do we have an email ID where a whistleblower can provide info about temple authorities doing wrong, indulging in wrong stuff?
Write to us, visit our website, and it's templeworshippers.org. Log in, and one of us will get back to you and get the details, and we can initiate any legal action that is appropriate.
Mm-hmm. And from P, Mr. P, will non-Hindus be allowed inside temple if government control is relinquished?
No. Again, no. The answer is qualified. The agamas of those specific temple. For example, Chidambaram temple, anybody can go, but they can't go on to the inner sanctum, where we can only go with the Kanaka Sabai. You can go only with males can only go without their shirts. Mm-hmm. There, non-believers can't go, but otherwise they can go all the way in. It again depends on temple tradition. But people who don't believe in Hindu thoughts, wisdom, respect, we won't want them to be in the inside temple.
All right. Mr. D.H. Pavan Kumar. Muslims gather on Fridays, Christians on Sundays. What's your idea to increase the brotherhood, sisterhood among Hindus? Though we have Kumbh Melas, etc., don't you think we need to gather weekly or frequently to educate ourselves about our dharma?
See, we are not a proselytizing or a missionary kind of religion. And I don't know, over a period of time, I myself have started questioning. I mean, people say that, look, Hinduism is a way of life. I think it's beyond that. And I think to your point, Hinduism, I have realized, is actually a pursuit of knowledge. And all of us have different practices. And coming specifically to temples, there was a time in Karnataka specifically, and definitely in Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, almost everywhere, there used to be Harikathas. And Harikathas, I mentioned this even in the last presentation, Sandeep.
Yes.
Harikathas were performance which beautifully merged together ancient mythology, our own
epics.
Knowledge, epics, thank you. I didn't want to use the word mythology, thank you very much. Our own ancient epics, the music, the values, the stories, everything merged together beautifully well and captivated an entire generation. And we still find some avenues that subconsciously we ingrained it. We still go, and that's why we find the songs in movies so attractive, because that kind of fulfills their aspirations. So to your point, if we can bring satsangs and pravachans back to the temples, the deep insight, 20 minutes of listening to a Kathopanishad or Mundakopanishad, it just changes the perspective dramatically. We need those kind of things. And fortunately, we have different adinams, mathams, and gurus, Swamijis who are supporting those kind of opportunities outside the temples, unfortunately.
So one next question is from Priyavrat Bhatt. We are mostly talking about South Indian temples. Is it only that South Indian temples are under government control, or is this a pan-Indian issue?
It's a pan-Indian issue. We had a seminar in Delhi about in July last year in India International Center. We had a huge participation from various groups. It's a pan-Indian issue, and we have mostly, since we work mostly in South, I have highlighted issues that relate to us.
Mm-hmm. From again Mr. P, related to the earlier query on whether people around temples can be pulled in to support your efforts, with the younger generation moving out, do you foresee areas around the temple becoming majority non-Hindu?
It's happening. As we speak, Nungambakam, Agatheswara Kovil, unscrupulous trustees sold the land to multiple people. They even constructed masjid in that area. And today, we have got a favorable, and the whole agitation, by the way, for Agatheswara temple is being, agitation I say, is being done by a local resident who is actually a Christian. But he also has got deep belief and faith in the Hindu temples and the Hindu way of life that he has been agitating for the last several years, collecting. He's an ordinary driver in government department.
Wow.
And he has got a favorable ruling today, declaring a construction as illegal. And another person who is a son of a famous Janata Party leader, a Gandhian, he has filed a petition for same temple saying that all this sale of properties is illegal, and asked the Madras High Court to pass an order to force the commissioner to retrieve those lands. So, younger generation moving out, the others coming in. Another example, in our own village temple, we have the annual Nataraja festival, Arudra Darisanam, where it's a tradition that wherever the village youngsters are, in whatever caste they are, they all come back on that day of Arudra Darisanam to carry the Lord Nataraja on their shoulders and dance around the temple. And if you go from urban areas, in rural areas, you will find that linkage and the belongingness extremely strong, and the youngsters are definite. Given the connectivity, given the communication, youngsters are going back to the roots.
It's pretty heartening to hear. So the next question is from Ramaswamy, and after this I'll take just one more question before we wind up. So can we not conceive of a system by which temples can be the center of the economy in many villages and cities after gaining autonomy from government? Temples can identify and give licenses to households who can host tourists. They can be guides to the visitors or pilgrims. They will also get incentives and save money for tourists. Win-win situation.
I think we have, it's great that we have great suggestions coming in. But the thing to remember, and we have been arm wrestling with this within ourselves, if you want to succeed, we got to be focused. And currently the focus is purely on 6 things temples must do. In terms of retrieving and restoring the original way the temples were. There are various things we can accomplish if we can just cross the first mile.
So the last question is from Priyavrat Bhatt again. Apologies for a naive question, but when we say government control, is it that the money collected in these temples go into government coffers, or these temples pay tax on the earnings?
No, government, all the money from temple goes to government, and the government government does what they want with the money, and they in fact stingingly give back to the temple what they think is bare minimum. And since the money goes to government, there's no question of tax. I mean, how much more can you tax? You're already taxing the temples. You're taking almost all their wealth. So there's no question of tax, because whatever money is collected on behalf of, by the way, remember, all the money of a temple belongs to the deity of the temple. The land, the immovable properties, the jewelry, money you put in the hundi, everything belongs to the deity. Yet the government takes it away from the deity and puts it in the consolidated account of the government. So once it enters there, it's as good as tax money that's kind of thing in the government.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining this informative webinar. I'm sure we learned a lot from Mr. Nagarajan. And on behalf of India Facts, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to Mr. Nagarajan. Remember that we do this webinar once every month. Thanks to everybody who joined in. We will be uploading the recording of this video on India Facts YouTube channel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, all of you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.